I think we can't forget the pandemic and like how they grew
Right,
up through this
right.
time where they weren't allowed to socialize. And so I think I see her being like hungry to, have those, like you said, millennia of cultural experience that
Hmm.
humans do, which is like social drinking or relaxing, and which obviously also means having conversation and getting to
Hmm.
know people and having fun and not being like stuck in a bedroom wondering if you're gonna die.
Right,
Right.
So
right.
I'm not surprised at all if this generation is like, okay, it's time to like let me go to the club for once in my life.
Yeah.
All right. Hip replacement episode number 17. Kyle, we're here with Amani Hope, dialing in from Oakland, California, the beautiful Bay Area. Amani's a writer and has a newsletter and touches on food and culture and books and a bunch of other stuff. But beyond that, I'm, as usual, kind of lost in the sauce. How'd we get here?
Yes. So Amani runs Cherry Bomb, which is a very fabulous newsletter about life and literary culture. And I think, there's, as someone who's also sort of in the literary world and also as a writer, I enjoy those sort of spaces. And I think Amani is definitely one that's very fresh and very like on the pulse of like good reading. There's a lot, or we might talk about this, but there's a lot of like sort of debates around like, what people should be reading and like what is
Mm.
like right and wrong to read. And I feel like Amani is very much like on trend with like the things that are actually being talked about in the literary world. And like, I really appreciate the commentary. So I sent a note and here we are.
Nice. Amani, welcome.
Thanks for having me, and thanks for the kind words about my newsletter. I love
Of
it.
course.
Well, so I said I was lost in the sauce right off the bat because when you guys said Cherry Bomb, I was like, oh, you like the magazine about food, but clearly this isn't. We're not. No,
Well,
okay.
you're not wrong because I love food. I have a secret secret food newsletter actually.
Oh,
Oh,
wow.
okay. See, this
Oh,
is it. The hip
yeah.
replacement difference. We're breaking news here.
That is like
I like
the
this.
Yeah.
Substack Finsta. That's a first.
Yeah, so
No,
cherries, I just love them. So you're right.
okay. All right. I like. I
It's your
mean,
season.
cool. So okay. So I have before we get into our typical intergenerational discourse, I do have a question, which is how does one come to be a writer in the literary oeuvre at this point? Because we have a lot of discussions on this show about like what makes a writer, whether anyone is a writer anymore, given
Mm.
the multi-platform demands on what has been known as writers in the past. Like, so how did we get here, Amani?
That is a $1 million question that I think after speaking with more authors too these days that I think they're asking the same question.
Right, sure.
I had a great conversation with John Hickey, the author of Big Chief, recently. I interviewed him for my newsletter, but I also got to have dinner with him and
Oh,
another
wow.
author. Yeah, after
How
a
lovely.
panel they did, it was so awesome, and
That's
it
cool.
was like watching two like construction workers eating like a sandwich on the side of the road, like on the curb after a long day, and it was, yeah, it was kind of like a peek behind the curtain of like how are we doing this and how and
Yeah.
we talked about that too, like about how new writers these days are taking 10 years to write a book, and I was replied to that saying, yeah, because it's so terrifying that like it has to be so good because if you're rejected they're going to remember that and you might not get a second chance. So I think that's the $1 million question, and I think it's the answer is getting just so good that people can't look away.
Yeah. Well, I was gonna say that's so interesting because like I have a lot of, I went to grad school for fiction writing and all this sort of stuff, and like I have a lot of friends who, whether in that program and beyond that, who are like sort of fiction writers or just like writers in general, and there are so many who I know and have known even before then who are really just scared to put their stuff out there. And like I think to what you're saying is that like a lot of it I think is sort of like a perfectionism problem. But I think also, which is even more interesting in a way, is that like a lot of this sort of is a reaction to social media, is that it's like I am nervous enough to make a TikTok. So like I don't necessarily want to put my writing out there because I don't want people to sort of like just cut me to shreds. So like that in some ways I think for at least some people that I've encountered, it's sort of like is a bit of a failure to launch. There's such a sort of like pre-fear. And like I get it, but I'm also very much like, immersion therapy, just like put it out there. Make people sort of like
Yes.
desensitize yourself to that fear, and then like it doesn't matter. Be free yourself. Become cringe. Doesn't matter.
Yes.
That and then also just the notion of these, the boundaries of cringe
Right.
changing entirely, right? Like what would have been acceptable for an author of yesteryear to have done versus what is necessary for an author of the current moment to do is very different. Which kind of brings us to our first story. Actually, I think you guys will get a kick out of this. So the UK's poet laureate wrote up a review of Oasis in advance of Oasis's reunion show in The Guardian this week, and I just want to read. I had so much fun reading this. So this is Simon Armitage, who is the poet laureate of the UK, and he's writing about this band, which is, familiar or not, like very pop rock and roll, swaggering.
So Oasis is a band. I didn't know who they were.
Yeah.
Lovely.
Yes, Amani, Oasis
like,
is a band.
go there.
And for Gen X audiences who've tuned in for my dumb takes on things, like it's a pretty important one. But this, I just like the reading a writer of this caliber describe a very, very lowest common denominator pop culture phenomenon, and I say that with true love for this band. So this is a piece. Liam, who is the singer, Liam was the couldn't give a toss gobshite with not so much a potty mouth as the oral equivalent of a sewage works for a large metropolitan area, and that was okay because he had all the cockiness and looks to back it up. He also had a fantastic voice, all tonsil, adenoid, teeth and tongue, loud enough to crowd surf to the back of a stadium, sharp and sneery enough to enunciate. Noel, who is the main songwriter, took the role of scheming mastermind and ace guitarist. It was his idea to conquer the planet and his competitions that would do it. When he stepped into the rehearsal room of his kid brother's wannabe outfit, he found a shambles, and he gave them material, discipline, and direction. That's the received wisdom, at least. But he couldn't have done it without a frontman like Liam. And it's just like...
That's amazing.
You're just like, wow. I want to see this band. I want to read more of this guy. Like, just kind of amazing. But again, it's like this is the most vaunted writer in the UK writing about, pop culture nonsense, which I think is just amazing.
But I think it's in ways, and this is, I know this much more than you, Amani, about Oasis. I don't know that much, but I know that much more. But like the one big thing about the band is that like it very much is, maybe not definitive, but like it very much defines a moment and a time in like British culture and British pop culture, really defining it. And like I know at least there being years of like, before this reunion, and probably that's why it was so long. I think it was 16 years was sort of like the gap was because like the brothers were like constantly feuding. The Liam and Noel sort of like having this like real like brotherly relationship on main, which sort of like prevented, say, like, which is probably why you haven't heard of them, because like they only recently have become sort of like, I don't even know if they buried the hatchet, but sort of getting back together enough where like they're now in like fashion ads and they're doing shows like this.
The checks got big enough, basically.
The checks got big enough, that's for sure.
The checks got big enough, yeah, exactly.
Well, I'm always interested in family drama, so listen to
well, they have. Oh, sorry, Kyle. I was just going to say they've been subject to many, many fascinating accounts of that, as well as documentaries and so on.
Well, that's what I was going to say. Is that like it's so? I would not be surprised if like I don't think there's going to be like an actual like drama of the movie, like an A24 film of it. But like I wouldn't be surprised if like during this big comeback, if like they had a whole documentary crew and there's going to be like a Netflix something about it. Like it is to that point of like family drama, like I would not be surprised if there was sort of a bigger sort of product coming out of this, or an ongoing sort of thing that will happen. Because,
It would be a
like,
shocking miss if there weren't.
absolutely. Yeah.
Well, so anyway, that was my Gen X thing, and then with honorable mention, of course, to going to out to all of my Gen X family and the Boomers who inspired them, who saw Black Sabbath off into the night with its giant reunion show in Birmingham, England over the weekend. I was a little surprised actually. The New York Times sent John Caramonica to Cardiff to cover the Oasis show, but didn't send him to Birmingham, which is not very far away, maybe an hour's drive, to go see Black Sabbath. They sent a different writer, but that was Metallica and Guns N' Roses and a bunch of Tool playing. Playing.
I thought it was just them. I thought it was just Black Sabbath.
No,
like all the coverage
it was
around it was
10,
like
10 bands or more than that playing this testimony to Black Sabbath and its own inimitable poetry as Ozzy Osbourne signed off and retired from the public eye with this show.
Wow. Okay. I have so much to say about this because
Go ahead.
Okay, so I don't know Oasis, but I love Black Sabbath. I listen to them so much.
Wow.
And from like my early 20s. Yeah, I don't know what, like, I think I had a record. There's that whole revisiting of what has come before in early generations, like analog things. I love film photography as well. And Black Sabbath, I would just listen to nonstop when I used to work at a startup at home doing like customer support. So it was just like
that is incredible.
It's the sort of thing to put you in the mood, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. And I have a fun story because I also so Metallica has technically seen my boobs.
Wow.
Okay.
Damn.
More news here on hip replacement. Okay, got it. Okay.
This is a story I always thought about writing about too because it's just so random. But I used to model actually, and me and my partner, longtime partner, were cast on a shoot for Metallica's music video. And they brought us to like some random North California town, and they were all very young, and some people looked, I think, younger than they were, which wasn't great for music video because they had us all in vintage cars surrounding them on a platform while Metallica played, and they had us like making out and taking off our shirts and stuff. So that was the role for the music video. So I was like, technically, Metallica seen my boobs and taken us making out with my longtime partner. It was so bad, and even during, I was like, this does not make any sense. It's like looks like a bunch of teenagers are having sex around them, and they absolutely did not use it. They scrapped the whole thing and just did footage from their studio recordings.
Oh, really?
Wow.
Yeah, so I'm really interested in this show. I need to watch it. I got to see all these bands.
Well, what's so interesting about this is that that story that you just told is the implication of all of the kinds of recordings that were done that never saw the light of day in the past, and the ways in which these kind of nostalgic events demand a reassessment of them and so on and so forth. As you were telling the story about it being scrapped, I was like, I was on the set of a music video that got totally scrapped once. It was Lady Gaga featuring R. Kelly.
Yeah.
Whatever that single was. Yes. Yeah, it was a big one, and it was a gigantic production, multiple days, and it all got totally killed.
Damn.
Yeah,
but it's
probably
just,
wise.
Yeah, we just are sort of in this moment of reappraisal and reassessment. Did you get to hang out with Metallica at all? Were they cool guys?
Yeah, they were fine. We didn't get to hang out with them, just sort of watch them on the stage.
Right.
I like that.
Watching them like drink water between.
Yeah, the lead singer was not stoked. He was not stoked though. He
James.
Damn.
I don't think. Yeah.
Poor James.
Well, I would say like an
All right.
interesting thing about the Ozzy Osbourne thing is that like I feel like the Oasis thing I heard a little bit more. The Ozzy Osbourne thing I heard less. I feel like it was kind of a big deal that it was actually happening, and like I remember hearing about it and like it actually happened, and I didn't hear about it when it was happening until like today, like this afternoon. I was like, oh shit.
Yeah.
And like a Jack Black thing happening as well, and like all this stuff. So like it was I
What's
think, in
happening
some
with
ways it
Jack
sort of
Black?
speaks to say like a sort of, something that will happen to all of us is that sort of like age, no matter how important you are, like it takes you out very quietly. And like that sort of speaks to sort of like how culturally we treat elders. Cause like that is, same thing happened with Joe Biden as well. Not to say it's false equivalent, but like that it was interesting to me that like the media didn't sort of like rally around more other than like the New York Times story of like showing up. Like I didn't see more, and that could be my internet. That could be a me thing.
Yeah.
I missed it too.
Oh, sorry, Amani. Go ahead.
Sorry, I just said I missed it too. I didn't even know Ozzy Osbourne was retiring until you said it. I was like, whoa.
Same, same. No, no.
Yeah.
And I guess that's the thing. I
Wow.
missed it entirely as well, which is so interesting, right? Because it's like these artists are so canonical and and important to so many people across generations, and yet it's really easy to miss just because we're all paying attention to I don't know what, like whatever else it was that happened this weekend.
Whatever else fuck's happening in the news, yes. Well, I mean, to the point of that is like, yeah. I mean, I'm surprised that even like the millennial like BuzzFeed factory, rest in peace, doesn't even really exist anymore. But like, the Osbournes are such a big show and a big part of the millennial
Sure.
life. Like, I'm surprised that there wasn't more of that sort of like nostalgia factory at work. But I guess
Mm.
that truly is over. That moment is over.
Yeah, and instead we're talking mostly about how different generations use and refer to emojis.
Hmm.
Okay, I'm excited to talk about this though.
All right, so Kyle, this was your story, I think.
It was
Let's get
Amani's,
into
but
this
like
one.
it was a
Oh,
story
was it?
about
I'm
like
sorry, Amani. Excuse me. So,
how the one that it was a Telegraph story about uh how different generations view emojis. And I feel like stories like this emerge every few years or months. And the one that they sort of use is the sort of like classic smiley face and how that is sort of interpreted by younger generations as sarcasm, and others may not see that. But Amani, to that point, like, I give us your take, give us your thoughts. And then like I have a lot of thoughts on this as well in sort of different ways, but like I want to hear where you're coming from.
Okay, so I think emojis are really interesting because clearly there's been a development of online language that
Hmm.
is different from, you know, writing in other places or talking in person. But at the same time, we're trying to mimic how we communicate in person as much as possible. And I think that's just really cool because it's essentially creating a whole maybe different type of alphabet or something to
Hmm.
communicate body language. And so it's interesting because growing up younger, you're going to understand how to do that and be a part of this sort of online dialect, whereas you maybe miss that like language learning when you're older because you've already learned language.
sure.
And
Yeah.
so I was curious if there was any emojis too that maybe we each would receive differently.
I mean,
That's yeah,
yeah.
interesting, Kyle. Go, 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 go.
Well, I was just gonna say that like I think I agree with you completely, Amani. Like I've thought for years sort of like emoji, and like for a long time I was running a sort of write a group of writers, a copywriting team for an agency, and like a big part of the work that I did was sort of like analyzing sort of like use of emojis and like how the brands can use it, because like it was very easy if you're trying to connect with a Gen Z audience in the early 2020s to look really lame if you use the wrong emoji, et cetera, or if you
Yeah.
use one, then you look cool, but then also you co-opting, all that sort of stuff like became a big part of the conversation. And like I think that that's sort of is like like memes and like certain aspects of TikToks, like there's so many embedded languages within the internet that sort of like signal culture, subcultures, communities, spaces online and off, and even like sort of like intimacies as well, that I think is really interesting. I do a monthly sort of event recapping the month, and I did it yesterday. and somebody brought up the wedding, the TikTok wedding entrance meme, and a lot of people didn't know about it, so I played it for everybody. And half of the
I
room
don't know
who
about
aren't on,
this.
so it's just like people
I
use
don't either.
different. Oh wow. Okay, so people. Okay, so this is a good test. We'll see if it actually works. Is that it's this trend where people just take any random song. They could even take like the Star Spangled Banner. So the song is playing in the background, and they basically will go like this or however they want to like signify people and put on the screen like bridesmaid one, bridesmaid two, whatever, and then the bride. And so like it's a sort of like big reveal that sort of lines up with the sort of like grandeur or dramatics of a song. So there was a lot of really ridiculous things happening. And so I played it for everybody, and half the room was just like, I don't get it. Like, I don't get what's happening. And like
Right.
a big part of that is like, if you don't know the sort of like meme language and just sort of like the language of how TikTok works, is that like, they're signifying a real event, obviously, with their hands, so that this action came from, I forget the exact thing, but I remember there was a meme like 4 meme cycles ago that this was building off of. So if you missed those 4 cycles beforehand, you coming in just to the wedding thing, you won't get it, because like it requires a sort of like
Yeah. Yeah.
foundational linguistic based knowledge of this humor to get it. And like I think it's the same thing with emojis as well, but like it's obviously TikTok's a bit more 4-dimensional, but like it's a very similar thing.
I it I wonder to what extent how many meme cycles from the beginning do you have to be to sufficiently separate yourself so a thing just becomes absurd and therefore valuable in its own right. Do you know what I mean? Like,
That's what I thought this would be, and then it wasn't. People were just like, I don't get it. I thought this was so straightforward, and like it really was not.
well,
I mean,
what you're describing sounds ridiculous, so I might laugh at it because it seems ridiculous, but
well, that's
not
what I was
because
expecting, but
I
like,
understand what it's imbued with.
nope, nope.
So funny. Well,
Um,
part of it is also like I was reminded of, as you were talking, Kyle, I was reminded of somebody, maybe Casey Newton or Ryan Broderick or somebody like that who includes good memes or good tweets, whatever, in their newsletters. Posted one that said millennials use lol like stop at the end of a telegram, lol, and
that's true.
well,
That's
okay.
true.
So
That's great.
that really helped me actually understand, because the lull, as someone who is not millennial and has never understood the lull thing, I was like, oh, now I understand. It's like, okay, it's a punctuation.
Wow.
Got it. I've never.
I thought that was obvious. No, I guess
No,
no. Okay.
no. I thought it just. I mean, because the way I read it is like people are just like nervously laughing at themselves. Like, here's
That
an
I think
is
that's
here's an
it too.
here's an
I
uncomfortable
think,
truth I
yeah.
don't really want to present you with, lol.
Well,
Like,
I was gonna say to that, like there's a specific, and Amani, I'd be curious to get your weighing in on all of this, but like there is a specific, to the point of generational, say like texting and communication, there's a very specific sort of like cadence. I'm trying to remember, because I just was telling somebody about this and I was like, that's exactly what it is. There's a specific sort of like cadence and a presentation of language in like say a text message that like Gen X does that seems so serious and scary at points, that I was like, this is not that deep, but like the way that things sort of like come across, it's always just like multiple lines, and like there I think there's like a specific emoji or like turn of phrase, I'm forgetting it now, where it's like there it is, and like it always, I'm just like, oh my god, like am I in trouble, or like I'm mad, but I'm just like, no,
oh, I
take a
get
step
I get
back, take
I
a
get
step
accused
back.
of this all the time. I am the nicest, and I get accused of this all the time. Like, oh my God, you scared. I thought I was in trouble. You scared me, or
Yeah,
whatever it is. And I'm
yeah,
just like, no, I just cannot. But
I
anyway,
it's a
do
Gen X
have
thing.
an idea for
I guess.
this actually,
Tell
which
us.
is that I think um, young girls have been a huge influence on internet like
Hmm.
dialect,
Yes.
and young girls are classically meant to, be accommodating and soft and not offend. And so, we just got rid of the period. We're like, that is
Right.
way too much, and added some exclamation points. And we're like, okay, so everyone's happy. This is good. And so now when we communicate, obviously with older generations, and it's like 4 words, period, 4 words, period. You're like, oh shit, is everything okay?
Yeah,
Yeah.
that is true. That I
But yeah,
feel
I
that
think that's a
completely.
huge yeah, I think that's a huge influence on this on essentially the vibe of like how we want to communicate, which is friendly and, unless something is wrong, then you're gonna get a
Yeah.
period.
Right. Well, I mean, yeah, that makes. Look, I think there's a lot to that theory, Amani, and I also think that by virtue of that fact, it's very easy to see how it floats under the radar of like a long-standing um, parochial kind of view of how people should communicate, and so
Hmm.
when it bubbles up and
Totally.
then suddenly becomes, very surprising. Um, what I wonder is as someone who seeks to be a communicator, like not and how do I specifically, but like at what point can you signal, all right, I'm there's no tonal implication here.
Right.
I'm just asking a
Yeah.
question, or I'm
Yeah.
just,
I
you know what I mean?
I
yeah.
I would say a few things. I've had this discussion many times. Like again, to that
Mm,
old job, like we talked about it all the time.
yeah.
Is that like I think one? This is going to sound ridiculous and it's counterintuitive, but I think like Amani even mentioned this is like adding in exclamation points automatically makes things lighter and feel more friendly and excited. It makes things feel less not serious, and like obviously at a certain point it can be very serious, the use of exclamation point, but a lot of times it's just like like let me know what you think exclamation point is excited. That's not like you're in trouble. So like that is very like it lightens things a lot. That number one. Number two is like the use of emojis really helps as well, because that's sort
Right.
of like using that to replace punctuation automatically lightens things as well. LOL might be a bridge too far for you, Ben, but like that is
I
possible.
do a lot of haha because
Okay, that's
that's
that's just as good. That's just as
Yeah.
good. I think that
okay.
is just as good. The other thing I would say too is like, and this is maybe a bit more didactic, is that like when in doubt, just like literally say what you mean, or not what you mean, but just like clarify it and be like, I'm just curious, or like, haha, like that. Then makes it automatically much lighter.
See, that's so interesting because to me it's like the whole, and Amani, you tell me what you think, but the like I'm just curious is it's sort of like starting a sentence with respectfully. It's like I'm actually saying the opposite here.
Well, yeah, but that's the point though. It's the same thing, but just like presented in a different form. I think.
Yeah,
Anyway,
fair enough.
Amani, what do you think? What's your
I
advice?
think if you're ever in doubt with whoever you need to message, just put a little colon, parentheses at the end of your sentence, a little smiley face. You don't even have to do a whole
But
emoji.
if I do the wrong smiley face, then I'm in trouble.
Well,
But on the keyboard, the colon and then the
Oh,
open or
oh
closed
yeah,
parentheses.
got it.
Yeah.
Well,
emoticon. Yeah, yeah.
that's also a really
Yeah,
good
yeah.
way to signal that I am in fact old. Is that I don't know how to do regular
But
emojis. I
also
do
cool because
too
like a lot of young people have brought it back and adopted it, or
All
even
right.
just
Well,
like the bracket and then three. I do that a lot.
here's here's the part
Oh,
where
my sister likes that one.
Yeah.
here's the part where I might get myself in trouble. I hope not.
Okay.
My favorite emojis because they seem enthusiastic and energetic are just lightning bolts. I just like to do lightning bolts.
Okay.
Is
I
that
love
okay?
that.
That's not
Does that
problematic.
mean
That's
I'm?
okay.
This doesn't mean I'm a fascist or something. I
No,
just
no,
want
no,
to
no,
make
no.
sure. It's just okay.
No.
Good.
That's actually probably really safe emoji.
Yeah. That's like doing fire or whatever. Like that's like a very
Yeah,
similar
yeah,
one.
that's always
All
gonna
right.
be
Good.
good.
Just making sure. Great.
Yeah.
I'm so glad I'm not in trouble. Oh
Good.
man. All right. Well, Kyle, so now that we've sort of done the intergenerational story, what are the millennials concerned about this week?
Well, one thing that I'm sort of curious about, and I did a little bit of writing about this, is that like we've talked about smoking a good amount on this podcast, and like
Yeah.
there was two recent stories, and this isn't necessarily millennial, but I think they do sort of relate because I think millennials sort of like have lived through the bridge in a certain way. Is that like there was a study, I think it was from UC Davis, came out about how most sort of like disposable vapes give you like I think 20 times more the amount of lead that you would get from like a pack of cigarettes, like one vape whatever thing. That, which I thought was a bit shocking, but also like unsurprising.
And this is
Uh,
this is lead.
Lead, yeah, yes.
Okay. Which
So
is good for brain health. it helps.
Yeah, exactly. Well,
Yeah.
as somebody said, like it's sort of like it carries on the American tradition of lead poisoning. So here we are.
Children historically love lead.
Yeah, exactly. That's why vapes are multicolor and why they taste like cotton candy. But like that is one thing, but then also that like there was an article in the Financial Times last week, I believe it was last week, about how Gen Z is now drinking more because like historically it was like, they're not drinking a lot, and like now they're drinking more hypothetically because the cost of living crisis has gone down. I think all that is really interesting in the sense of like, again, like from the millennial lens, I was just like, the lead story made me think of just like, I don't still smoke cigarettes, but like sort of thankful to have gone through that so that I knew my sort of relationship to something that was a bit more finite versus like vaping never ends. It's just like you vape and it just like, there is no stop unless the battery is dead, unless you run out of juice, and that could take days. So like you can just do it all day and like really fuck yourself up and not know it. And like I as a former smoker, it was like, that was something, it's like when it's done, it's done. And the drinking thing, I think, sort of like is a bit of the opposite, where it's just sort of this like, coming around this sort of carousel of just like, things that are just like true of all people. And I think like it was inevitable that like maybe hypothetically Gen Z would start drinking, was like that's just like a fact of humanity. And like the same with like a cigarette versus a vape, is that like these are just very sort of like human things. Like I don't think that both of those are very obviously problematic for our bodies, but I do think like, wine, for example, is like thousands of years old. So like part of me thinks it's so human that you do these things. Yeah, it's like you're participating in larger human culture by doing this stuff. And like to me that's refreshing, but also like again, millennials, we went through the trenches of like drinking and smoking pretty hard. And that's why a lot of are sober now.
Amani, calling in from California, global home of clean living and all of that sort of stuff. And I don't know. Do you see people smoking or vaping anymore? I mean, I have teenage kids, so it's in my universe in a way that I don't love. But which is not to say that either of them smoke or vape. I hope they don't. But it is certainly like something I'm sort of aware of in their ecosystem. But I'm also like in my adult life see it very rarely these days.
I think, specifically being in California too, there is definitely the health wellness sphere, but there's a huge duality here because there's so many different pockets and bubbles. So there will be, pockets, neighborhoods where you're, you can get like a grass shot or whatever. But there's definitely, especially in the Bay Area, like a huge drinking culture here. I think.
Cue the auto cue. I like that sound effect there, Kyle. That was excellent.
Oh, sorry.
It was almost like
can we hear that?
Campbell had come in with
sorry.
Come in with a Foley.
I'm staying hydrated.
That's smart. Yeah, you got. Speaking of drinking, stay hydrated. I think so. My younger sibling, my brother, he's 23. He's already married. He's married at 22.
Wow.
I'm 32, so I'm like 9 years older than him. And it's interesting because I'm like obviously on the very tail end of the millennial age, so I definitely relate to his age group a lot. But it is interesting to see he has completely rejected everything. He's like, no drinking, no social media, no drugs.
Wow.
Yeah, and me and my sister are like, you want to have a glass of wine? He's like, no, don't ask me. And his wife, she likes to drink like occasionally. I'm like, okay, we can have a glass of wine together or something. But I got to see them sort of go through that transformation because they were dating in high school. And so I think with his wife, for example, I think that I think we can't forget the pandemic and like how they grew up through this time where they weren't allowed to socialize. And so I think I see her being like hungry to, have those, like you said, millennia of cultural experience that humans do, which is like social drinking or relaxing, and which obviously also means having conversation and getting to know people and having fun and not being like stuck in a bedroom wondering if you're gonna die.
Right.
Right.
So
Right.
I'm not surprised at all if this generation is like, okay, it's time to like let me go to the club for once in my life.
Yeah. Yeah.
Kyle, I
Good.
wonder. So I
Good.
wonder. One of the things that we've talked about, Amani, on the pod in the past is this notion of social obligation, like purchasing cultural capital as social obligation, right? I have to spend $600 on a Taylor Swift ticket because I have to. Well, no, of course you don't, but you could. And what I guess the way that the FT story was framed around the idea that the cost of living crisis has like lessened, and that's why young people are drinking more again, struck me as kind of weird, because you can always spend a lot on drinking and you can always spend not a lot on drinking. Like that has never changed. I wonder if there's a signal there that says actually the focus on compulsory experience is lessening a little bit, and instead we're getting to we get to make our own pragmatic choices here.
I think that's a very good point. I think you would be right, because like that was always my thing when the stories came up, was like, look, when I was like 22 in LA and like working at an American Apparel, like I was buying like a $3 bottle of wine like a few days a week, and just like having that and sharing that with people. Like, not good wine, but it was cheap. And like, I know obviously there's some inflation. That might be $5. $2 Chuck might be like $4. I actually don't know how much $2 Chuck is now, but like,
how much is $2 Chuck now?
I have no idea.
Amani, Kyle definitely doesn't know because he's in Barcelona.
I don't know.
But have you been to Trader Joe's recently? I have not.
See, this is where maybe this is where I start to become more of a millennial, where I'm like, I've actually been drinking, or actually no, I think Gen Z have been really enjoying this too, which is like the natural wine
Oh yeah.
trend,
Yes.
which I'm in love with. So I haven't bought Trader Joe's wine in a long time. I'm like going to
I'm
my local
Googling it.
natural wine retailer.
Yeah.
Okay, so as of according to this AI interview, or overview rather on Google, as of the last reported information, it's around $2.99. So it's $3 Chuck
Wow.
now.
$3 Chuck. But
Three
in
buck
other
Chuck,
in
okay.
other states, the price can be higher, potentially reaching $3.79. So $4, as high as $4 Chuck.
But all that being said is that like there was this, I remember again around that time when I was like American Apparel, had no money, whatever. It was like 2008, and like that around, it was, the financial crisis, all this stuff. I remember the writer Joel Stein at the time. I think he had a column, I think, for Time, and like a somewhat comical column as well. And he wrote, I think, like, of all the things you should save your money on, like one of the things you should continue to spend your money on is like wine and booze. Because like it's not that much, and that always sort of like, I know it was a joke, but also like it stuck with me because like it's not that much. Like, yes, if you're spending on like a $50 bottle of wine 4 nights a week, yeah, that's a lot of money. But like a $3 bottle of wine, like, don't, again, to the point of joy and to the point of all this stuff, is that like you can still participate in that. Like, obviously, you do it as you will, but like I think to that point, Ben, like you're exactly right, is that like, I don't need Beyonce or Taylor Swift or whoever is touring to have a good time. Like, I can just do that at my house or at a restaurant or in a park or wherever. Like, I think there's sort of like the ideological chains of like, oh, like we have no third spaces, we have no this. And it's just like, let me get a little more creative with like how I approach this stuff. Is happening. I think a lot of that is just aging too, hopefully.
Well, I mean, this is this topic that we return to over and over again, which is essentially like all of these crises in the moment are actually not crises at all. They're just symptoms of a culture replaying itself in through slightly different lenses or vectors. I mean, yeah, I don't know. I guess I would like to drink cheap wine because I'd like wine to be cheap, but I'd also like to drink good wine. And so then I'm reminded of this Instagram meme I saw yesterday where nobody talks about how hard it is to come home from Europe to Applebee's. And having experienced that recently, I can testify to its accuracy.
Look,
that's so tragic. I'm very lucky because I live in very close to wine country, so I'm surrounded by
that's
right.
Yeah, you're in the other Europe.
Basically.
Yeah.
I can go, 10 minutes and it's just endless great wines.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Man.
All right. Well, so guys, as we're getting close to closing out, but we haven't really touched on what the Z's are concerned about this week. What comes to mind?
Ooh.
I well, one subject, I think this sort of ties into Amani, what you sent. I think like books are constantly an item that is discussed, and we've discussed it here about Gen Z and reading. And I think a lot of sort of like reading culture, again, like to me, it comes from like is being born and driven by young women, Gen Z women, that sort of like girls and gays culture we talk about as well. I think is really driving it because like we know despite the various stories about like more men need to read, which we'll talk about, is that like a lot of that is sort of coming from like the market sort of speaking to this younger female demographic and sort of what's going to get picked up by book talk. To that, there was a story that you sent, Amani, about, I think was written by Stephen Reese on Substack, about like how it was a bit of almost about like respectability of books and sort of like, only certain things are, the right things to read. And like there was a pretty unhidden jab at this idea of like book talk and what the young women are reading, and that like these
Yeah.
things are a bit unserious in ways. And like I'm curious, you said you had a lot of thoughts, and obviously you're writing in this space and you're in this space more closer than we are. I'm curious, about what your take is on sort of like the Gen Z reading experience, but then also like how that story, which is very viral on Substack, reflects that
Yeah.
sort of like bias that comes from capital L literary world about what younger women and younger people are reading.
Yeah, I think it is an important conversation because fiction, it provides a lot of value in culture. And about this particular article as well, it was very interesting and frankly bullshit to
Okay.
me because
Yeah.
um I don't think it was necessarily with the best intentions of understanding other
Absolutely.
genres or and what those books are doing. And my first question was, have you actually read these books that you're because he's making a judgment against specifically like romance books and fantasy
Yeah.
books and especially where they cross. But he was saying like he was mentioned the enemies to lovers romance is like rotting your brain kind of thing. But I'm like, have you actually read these books? Because there's a lot going on. I'm not even a huge romance reader. I've read like maybe two. But I have seen in them that they are doing multiple things at once. They
Sure.
are tackling really important themes. They are talking about relevant cultural things that maybe it's in a different format that isn't like hard to read on the prose
Mm-hmm.
level, but there are a lot of people that means it's giving them access to experience the world and understand the world, which is what fiction is really good at.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and it's like honest, it's truthful. So yeah, that's my take on it, I guess.
Well, it's the interesting thing about the counterpoint, right? Is that the somehow complication or that complication equals validity or smarts
Right.
or something like that, right?
Right,
And we like
exactly.
we in an ivory tower world of the past, maybe that was true. Those who were most erudite were most valuable, but it's like the people that have the greatest facility to travel between spheres and to communicate across multiple zones, I think are the ones that are most valuable. So it's a stupid argument.
It also was so I think exactly to your point, Amani, is that like it not only is sort of like reeks of misogyny, but also just like this sort of like ageism of just like,
Right.
you quote unquote like young dumb woman who only would read about XYZ. It's like, are you joking right now? And especially like, read between the lines of like, it and there was a Washington Post story I think about this recently about like, how can you not sort of connect the dots of like young women are reading a lot more romance, let's say romance of all stripes, from let's say the sort of rom fantasy items all the way to Sally Rooney. Meanwhile, like young women and young men couldn't be more dissimilar, and like their lack of sort of like connection sort of like to me is coming to a head in this expression of reading so many romance books and sort of that sort of being a thriving industry. Like the point of this Washington Post article, I'm forgetting wrote it, was about sort of like, you know, the literary boyfriend, like this sort of like these men who you read about in books who don't exist being more appealing and more attractive than real men now. Like how that's always been a thing, but like now it seems so pronounced because there is that gap. So like
Right.
that's also to me like why that story felt so sort of off, was like it clearly was like you don't talk to enough women, you don't talk to young women, and like you don't care to enter in any of those spaces, and like that.
Well, and that's probably the greatest point. Like
Absolutely.
Yeah.
The first two are a byproduct of the third.
Totally.
It's like, you know what I mean? If you don't care, then you don't care.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
That is, I thought you brought up something really interesting about just, I mean, yeah, it's all very interesting, but you also made me think about how, like, I read a literary romance novel recently called Big Fan, and it had that
Oh yeah.
literary boyfriend aspect to it. Like, because I'm trying to get familiar with romance, because, like I said, I haven't read that much in my life, and it was really interesting. Like, there is that aspect of, you know, this sort of what you could say like fan service maybe of like we're doing this because you're gonna have a fun like journey fantasizing about it. But that to me doesn't say that it's any less intellectual, because
Not
besides the
necessarily, no.
same
Right.
yeah, and the same book, by the way, was exploring the importance of universal income. So
Yeah.
it's like there's it's it
I
can
love
a book
that.
could do a lot of things at the same time, and I think women writers are especially good at that in romance, and I think that's totally missed, where it's like I actually read the really popular romantasy book recently. What was it called?
Oh, the black
I
cover.
have it around here. It's the dragon one. Oh my gosh.
Yes. Yeah, I don't remember the name of that. I haven't
Yeah,
read
oh,
it.
Fourth Wing. I read
Yes, that's
Fourth
it.
Wing recently, and mostly out of curiosity, but also I was like, this will be fun after a long year of reading a lot. And it was very fun. And it was, you know, it had that, like I'm saying, quote unquote, fan service aspect of like, you know, the sexiness and the appeal. But it was still talking about like the danger of ideology in a country like with
Right.
xenophobia the whole time. So
Yeah.
there's a lot going on.
And it's like it's fascinating to me really quickly, I'm sorry, is that like the story doesn't the piece doesn't touch about like the flip side of that. It's like what quote unquote what men are reading are just like how-to guides and like entrepreneurial things, which arguably are the worst thing you can read, and like they do the opposite effect of what we're talking about. Sorry, go ahead, Ben.
Well, no, I was just going to say, I mean, I was going to agree with you to say that because they are ultimately reductive and lack nuance.
Yeah.
Which I have to say, guys, has not been the case for this conversation. Like, we've been all over the map here. We've gone
Yeah.
contraband nudity and hidden cultural arcs to the parochial, the anti-parochial rise of romantasy. What a discussion for hip replacement number 17, Kyle.
We covered a lot. We went to the UK. We talked about texting. We talked about we covered it all. Fabulous.
This is the hashtags are going to be rich in the description on this one.
Yes.
Oh my God. Well, anyway, everybody, thank you for tuning in. We've been talking to Amani Hope. Amani writes Cherry Bomb, the newsletter, which is not about food, although maybe she'll tell us about her Substack Finsta. But it's about books, and you should check out. And then Kyle and I are here every Monday with a new guest. Although Amani, hopefully we'll have you back at some point soon, and we'll hear about what else you're reading in the future.
I would love to come back. Chatting with you guys was so fun. I'm like, let's talk for another hour.
Awesome.
Amazing.
This is what we want. Well, everybody, thanks for listening. Subscribe and like and share this with your friends and all that kind of stuff. And Amani, thank you again for being here. Kyle, great to see you. Till next
Thank you.
next
Good
week.
to see you too. Bye.